There's a market operating right now that doesn't appear in any listings, that has no websites, no advertising, no public face whatsoever. A market where boats change hands for cash, where paperwork is forged or non-existent, where buyers and sellers meet through encrypted messages and word-of-mouth networks that outsiders can't penetrate. A market dealing in ghost boats, abandoned vessels, boats with unclear titles, boats that officially don't exist or exist in legal limbo. And this market is growing rapidly, because as the traditional boat market collapses and abandoned boats accumulate in marinas and anchorages everywhere, a whole shadow economy has emerged to profit from the chaos. I'm going to take you inside this black market. I'm going to show you who the players are, how transactions work, what kinds of boats are being traded, and why this underground economy exists in the first place. I'm going to reveal the mechanisms that allow people to acquire boats that should be impossible to acquire, to move them across borders and jurisdictions, to create new identities for boats that had owners and histories. And I'm going to tell you why law enforcement largely ignores this market, even though what's happening is clearly illegal. Because what I'm about to describe isn't just fascinating from a true crime perspective. It's a window into how desperate the boat market situation has become, how completely normal systems have broken down, and how entrepreneurial criminals are filling the vacuum left by institutional failure. By the end of this video, you're going to understand something that very few people outside the black market itself understand. You're going to see how easy it is to make a boat disappear from official records and reappear with a new identity. You're going to learn about the specific vulnerabilities in boat registration and documentation systems that make this possible. You're going to hear about deals that happened, boats that were ghost boats and became legitimate again through black market processes, and the people who make livings doing things that would horrify anyone who believes in rule of law. This isn't speculation or theory. This is based on conversations with people who participate in this market, people who've bought ghost boats, people who've sold them, people who facilitate these transactions. I'm going to protect their identities, obviously, but I'm going to tell their stories because this needs to be understood. The boat market collapse isn't just creating financial losses and abandoned vessels. It's creating a criminal ecosystem that's going to have consequences nobody's thinking about yet. Stay with me, because what's coming is going to open your eyes to a world that exists in the shadows, operating by rules that have nothing to do with laws or ethics and everything to do with opportunity and desperation. Let me start by defining what I mean by ghost boats, because this is crucial to understanding the black market. A ghost boat is a vessel that exists physically but has unclear or problematic legal status. Maybe the owner abandoned it and can't be located. Maybe there are unpaid liens and the title is encumbered. Maybe the boat was improperly documented when it entered a country. Maybe there was a divorce or estate situation and ownership is disputed. Maybe the registration lapsed years ago and now there's no clear path to getting it current. These boats exist, they float, they could potentially be used, but they can't be legally bought or sold through normal channels because the paperwork is too problematic. In the healthy market, ghost boats are rare. They get resolved through legal processes or they get scrapped. But in the current collapsed market, ghost boats are everywhere. Marinas are full of them. Anchorages are cluttered with them. And traditional systems for dealing with them have been overwhelmed. The legal processes take too long and cost too much. Nobody wants to spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to clear title on a boat that might only be worth $50,000 once the title is clear. So the boats sit. And that's where the black market comes in. The black market sees ghost boats as inventory. These are boats that can be acquired for almost nothing, sometimes literally nothing, because the current possessor just wants them gone. A marina with an abandoned boat will sometimes give it to anyone who will take it away, no questions asked, just to free up the slip. An heir who inherited a boat they don't want and can't legally sell will sometimes let someone haul it away for a few $1,000s cash. The black market operators acquire these boats cheaply or free, then they work their magic to create new identities for the boats, and then they sell them into markets where the buyers either don't know about the problematic history or don't care. The profit margins are enormous. Acquire a boat for nothing, invest a few thousand in creating paperwork, sell for 30 or 40,000 to a buyer who thinks they're getting a legitimate deal. Do this a few times a year, and you've got a nice income from something that's almost entirely illegal. Now, let me walk you through how the black market actually operates, because the mechanics are important. It starts with sourcing inventory. Black market operators have networks in the boating world. They know marina managers, dock masters, brokers who've given up on moving certain boats. They know attorneys handling estates with problem boats. They know about boats that have been sitting abandoned. When a ghost boat opportunity arises, they move quickly. They'll offer to take the boat off someone's hands, usually for cash, sometimes for nothing. The person giving up the boat is just relieved to have it gone. No paperwork, no official sale, just a handshake, or not even that. The boat gets moved, usually at night or during quiet times when fewer people are watching. Now the operator has a boat, but no legitimate paperwork. This is where the black market gets creative, and this is where it becomes clearly criminal. There are several methods for creating new identities for ghost boats, and I'm going to describe them not to provide a how-to guide, but to show you how vulnerable the system is. Method 1 is title washing. This involves moving the boat to a jurisdiction with lax registration requirements and getting it registered there with minimal documentation. Some states and some countries will register boats with very little proof of ownership, maybe just a bill of sale, which can be easily fabricated. Once the boat is registered in that jurisdiction, it now has paperwork that looks legitimate. The operator can then sell it using that registration as proof of ownership. The buyer thinks they're getting a properly documented boat, and unless they dig deep into the history, they'll never know it was a ghost boat. Method 2 is identity theft, and I mean identity theft for boats. Every boat has a hull identification number, the CHIN, which is supposed to be unique and permanent, but HINs can be altered or swapped. An operator takes a ghost boat and finds another boat of similar make and model that was legitimately registered but has been destroyed or scrapped. They get documentation for the destroyed boat. Then they alter the ghost boat's HIN to match the destroyed boat's HIN. Now the ghost boat can be registered using the destroyed boat's paperwork. As far as the system knows, the destroyed boat has been refurbished and is back in service. Nobody checks whether the boat that was destroyed actually still exists somewhere else. Method 3 is document forgery. This is straightforward fraud. The operator creates fake bills of sale, fake registration documents, fake title transfers. With decent graphic design skills and access to official-looking forms, you can create paperwork that looks completely legitimate. Most buyers don't have the expertise to spot forgeries, and most registration authorities don't thoroughly verify documents that look correct. So forged paperwork works surprisingly often. The boat gets registered based on forged documents, and now it has apparently legitimate status. Method 4 is exploiting registration gaps. Different states and countries have different registration systems, and they don't always communicate well with each other. An operator can register a boat in one jurisdiction, then move it to another jurisdiction, and register it again with slightly different information. Now the boat has dual identities, or they register it federally, and also at state level, with conflicting information, creating confusion that makes it hard to determine the actual legal status. These gaps and inconsistencies create opportunities to launder ghost boats through the system. And method 5, which is increasingly common, is simply selling boats with no paperwork at all to buyers who are willing to take that risk. Maybe the buyer plans to operate the boat without registration, keeping it in unregulated waters or anchorages. Maybe they plan to use it for purposes where registration doesn't matter. Maybe they think they can figure out the paperwork themselves later. These cash deals happen constantly. Ghost boats sold for cash, no receipt, no documentation. Buyer assumes all risk. It's completely off the books. Now let's talk about who's participating in this black market, because it's not just criminals in the traditional sense. On the supply side, you have marina operators who are desperate to get rid of abandoned boats and will look the other way when someone offers to take one. You have heirs and executors dealing with estate boats who just want the problem solved and don't ask too many questions. You have boat owners who've hit financial trouble and need cash fast and can't go through normal sale channels. Some of these people know they're participating in something shady. Others convince themselves they're just solving a problem pragmatically. On the operator side, you have people who figured out the system vulnerabilities and built businesses around exploiting them. Some are sophisticated, running operations that acquire and move dozens of boats a year. Others are smaller scale, doing occasional deals when opportunities arise. Some have criminal backgrounds, and this is just another hustle. Others stumbled into it from legitimate boat businesses and gradually crossed lines until they were fully in the black market. And on the buyer side, you have people looking for deals who don't care much about legality. Maybe they're buying a boat to use personally, and they're willing to accept questionable paperwork to save money. Maybe they're buying to export to countries where documentation standards are even looser. Maybe they're flippers who think they can clean up the paperwork and resell legitimately. The buyer profiles vary widely, but what they all have in common is willingness to engage in transactions that exist outside normal legal frameworks. Let me tell you some specific stories because the abstract descriptions don't capture the reality of how this works. Story one involves a guy I'll call Mike. Mike worked as a dockmaster at a marina for years. He saw abandoned boats accumulate and watched the marina struggle with the costs and legal processes of removing them. He started quietly offering to take abandoned boats off the marina's hands. He'd move them to a cheap storage location. Then he'd work on getting them registered using the title washing method I described. He'd take boats to a specific state that had loose registration requirements, get them registered there with minimal documentation, then sell them through online listings in other states. The boats would have apparently legitimate paperwork from the lax state, and buyers wouldn't question it. Mike did this for about 5 years, moving maybe 40 boats total. He made several $100,000. Eventually, the marina he worked for realized what he was doing and fired him, but they didn't report him because they'd been complicit in giving him the boats. He's still out there operating, just more carefully now. Story 2 involves a woman I'll call Sarah, who inherited a sailboat from her father. The boat had unpaid marina fees, tax liens, and unclear title because her father had bought it years ago without proper documentation. Sarah couldn't legally sell it, couldn't afford to pay off the liens and fees to clear the title. The marina was threatening legal action. She found a buyer through word of mouth, someone who offered her $5,000 cash for the boat as is, no paperwork. She took the deal. The buyer moved the boat to Mexico, got it registered there with forged paperwork, then brought it back to the US and registered it in a different state as a foreign vessel he'd purchased. The boat now has apparently clean paperwork, and the buyer's been cruising on it for 3 years. Sarah got out from under a problem, the buyer got a boat cheap, and everyone involved broke multiple laws, but nobody's been caught. Story 3 involves an operator I'll call Carlos, who specializes in boats that have been damaged or partially stripped. He acquires ghost boats that other operators won't touch, boats that need serious work. He does minimal repairs to make them floatable, then exports them to Caribbean islands, where documentation standards are very loose. He gets them registered there, often bribing local officials to expedite the process. Then he sells them to cruisers or charter operators in the Caribbean who need cheap boats and don't care about paperwork issues. Carlos runs what's essentially a pipeline from US marinas with abandoned boats to Caribbean markets, desperate for any boats regardless of provenance. He's been doing this for over a decade, and he's never been investigated. These stories illustrate how the black market works in practice. It's not organized crime in the traditional sense. It's more like a distributed network of individuals finding opportunities and exploiting system weaknesses. And it's growing because the number of ghost boats is increasing and the traditional systems for dealing with them aren't scaling. Now let's talk about why law enforcement isn't stopping this. You'd think with all this illegal activity happening openly, with boats being stolen or acquired fraudulently and paperwork being forged, law enforcement would be all over it. But they're not, and there are reasons. First, boat documentation fraud isn't a priority for most law enforcement agencies. They're focused on violent crime, drugs, human trafficking, things that directly harm people. Paperwork crimes involving boats don't register as urgent. Second, investigating these cases is complicated and resource-intensive. You'd need to trace boat histories across multiple jurisdictions, interview people who aren't eager to cooperate, sort through documentation that's deliberately confusing. Most agencies don't have the expertise or the budget. Third, the victims are often complicit or don't want to press charges. The marina that gave away a boat isn't going to report it stolen because they voluntarily let it go. The heir who sold a boat for cash isn't going to report fraud because they participated in the fraud. Without victims pushing for prosecution, cases don't move forward. Fourth, the economic harm is diffuse and hard to quantify. Nobody's getting directly robbed or defrauded in obvious ways. The system is being exploited, but it's not clear who's losing money or how much. Without clear damages, prosecutors aren't interested. And fifth, honestly, some law enforcement and regulatory people privately think the black market is solving a problem that government should solve, but isn't. The ghost boats need to go somewhere. If criminals are making them disappear and turning them into usable boats, maybe that's not the worst outcome. Nobody's saying this publicly, but the lack of enforcement suggests a tacit acceptance that the black market is filling a gap. So the black market continues operating, largely undisturbed, growing as the boat market collapse creates more inventory. Now let me talk about the risks for buyers who participate in this market, because they're substantial even if prosecution is unlikely. First, you could lose the boat. If it's discovered that your paperwork is fraudulent or that the boat was acquired illegally, it could be seized. You'd lose your investment and have no recourse. Second, you could face civil liability. If the original owner or someone with a legitimate claim to the boat tracks it down, they could sue to recover it or for damages. You'd be in expensive litigation defending a position that's probably indefensible. Third, you might not be able to get insurance. If an insurance company investigates and discovers the boat's questionable provenance, they'll deny coverage. You'd be operating an uninsured boat, which is both risky and illegal in many jurisdictions. Fourth, you can't use the boat in certain contexts. If you want to charter it commercially or take it through certain international borders, the documentation will be scrutinized and fraud might be discovered. Your options for using the boat are limited by the sketchy paperwork. And fifth, you might have trouble selling it later. When you go to sell, a buyer doing proper due diligence might uncover the issues. You'd have trouble finding a buyer, and you might have to sell into the black market yourself at a huge loss. So yes, you might save money buying a ghost boat through black market channels, but the risks are real, and the savings might not be worth it. For sellers, the risks are different but also significant. If you're a marina or individual giving up a boat to black market operators, you might think you're off the hook once the boat is gone. But you could still face liability if the boat is later involved in accidents or causes environmental damage, and it's traced back to you. You could be accused of conspiracy or fraud if the black market transactions are investigated. You could face regulatory penalties for improper disposal of abandoned boats. The black market seems like an easy solution, but it creates long-term legal exposure. And for the operators themselves, the risks are obvious. They're committing fraud, forgery, theft potentially. If prosecuted, they're looking at serious charges and prison time. Even if prosecution is unlikely, the risk exists, and it could materialize if circumstances change or if they get unlucky. So while the black market is booming now, everyone involved should understand they're taking risks that could have severe consequences. Now let's discuss what this black market reveals about the state of the boat market and systems more broadly. The fact that this underground economy exists and is growing tells us that normal systems have failed. If the legal processes for dealing with abandoned boats worked well, if registration systems were robust, if authorities were properly resourced and motivated to handle these issues, the black market wouldn't have opportunities to exploit. But the systems are broken, overwhelmed, underfunded, and full of vulnerabilities. And when official systems fail, unofficial systems emerge. That's what we're seeing. The black market for ghost boats is a symptom of institutional failure. It's also a symptom of desperation. People participating in this market aren't doing it because they're hardened criminals who love breaking the law. They're doing it because they're trapped in impossible situations with no good legal options. Marina operators who can't afford to legally remove abandoned boats, heirs who can't afford to clear title on inherited boats, buyers who can't afford boats through normal channels but need boats for their livelihoods or lifestyles. These are people pushed into black market participation by circumstances, not by criminal intent. And that's what makes this whole situation so problematic. When normal people are driven to criminal activity because systems don't work, that's a fundamental breakdown of social order. Laws only function when they're reasonable and when there are legitimate alternatives to breaking them. When laws become impossible to follow, or when following them creates unbearable costs, people will find ways around them. That's what's happening with ghost boats. The legal paths are too expensive and too slow, so people take illegal shortcuts. And until someone fixes the underlying systems, the black market will keep growing. So, what needs to happen? The obvious answer is reform the systems that are creating the black market opportunities. Streamline abandoned boat removal processes. Create better registration systems with more verification and less fraud vulnerability. Fund authorities to actually enforce regulations and investigate fraud. Provide legal pathways for resolving problematic boat titles. Make it possible to deal with ghost boats legally without spending tens of thousands of dollars and years of time. If those reforms happened, the black market would shrink because the official channels would work well enough that people wouldn't need alternatives. But those reforms aren't happening. There's no political will, no funding, no urgency from authorities who should care about this. So the black market persists and grows, and more people get drawn into it, and the whole situation becomes more entrenched and harder to fix. What should you do with this information? If you're considering buying a boat, be extremely careful about boats that seem too cheap or where the paperwork seems incomplete or suspicious. Do thorough due diligence. Check hull identification numbers against registration databases. Verify ownership history. If something seems off, walk away. The deal might be a black market ghost boat, and buying it could create problems that outweigh any savings. If you're a boat owner dealing with a problem boat you can't sell normally, resist the temptation to go through black market channels. The legal exposure isn't worth it. Find legitimate solutions, even if they're expensive and slow. And if you're in the industry, marina operator, or broker or official, push for the systemic reforms that would eliminate the conditions creating the black market. Because as long as ghost boats accumulate and legal processes don't work, the black market will thrive. The secret black market for abandoned ghost boats exists. It's substantial, it's growing, and it's operating largely in plain sight with minimal enforcement. It's a shadow economy built on system failures and desperation, involving normal people pushed into criminal activity by impossible circumstances. Now you know it exists. Now you know how it works. Now you understand the risks and the implications. The question is, what happens next? Does the black market keep growing until it's too large to ignore? Do authorities finally intervene? Do reforms happen that eliminate the need for it? Or does it just become a permanent feature of the collapsed boat market, an underground economy that everyone knows about but nobody acknowledges? Time will tell. But right now, in marinas and anchorages everywhere, ghost boats are changing hands through channels that don't officially exist. and a whole ecosystem of buyers, sellers and operators is profiting from chaos that shows no signs of ending.